We can take the refuges in our hearts, sense into the refuge of the Buddha, our internal capacity for wisdom and understanding and peace that is in our own hearts. And sense into your own body and see what happens when you remember that you have this capacity. It's not outside you. I forget and remember that many times a day. And so what happens in yourself when you remember, yeah, it's here. And sensing into the refuge of the Dharma, the teachings. Sensing any gratitude that might rise for the teachings. And just feeling that in your body and your heart. And then sensing into the refuge of the community or the Sangha. This community here that is supporting you, supporting us. And sense what happens in your body when you remember that. Sensing the community of nature. Each breath supported by the earth. And the larger communities of our neighborhoods and friends and the community of Treaty 6. And other communities that we're a part of. Just this beginning to sense into the body any impact, any ripple of these reflections. Is one of the ways of understanding our capacity for wisdom, our capacity for knowing in the body what feels good, what feels right, what opens into spaciousness, what leads into tightness. It's resting into the wisdom in our own body. Sensing the body sitting on the chair, and sensing this whole body sitting. And as we sense into the body, we begin to sense into the flow of experience that this body and mind and heart are a part of. We might say this river of experience. The sensations of the body sitting. The sensations of the body breathing, rising and falling of the chest, the belly. The expansion of the sides of the body and the back. Just letting yourself rest into this ebb and flow of the breathing. There are some places we can inquire into this experience to support the stilling of the body and the mind. And sensing into the breath at the end of the exhale. Is there any sense of stillness there? And then as you notice if there is any sense of stillness or settledness there, what happens to sense of stilling or calming in the body? You can go with the flow of this experience, also by noticing any other pleasantness in this body, in this breath, and seeing what happens in the system when we notice that pleasantness. Is the pleasantness as the body begins or the system begins to calm? Really actively but gently noticing the pleasantness of that, and then seeing what happens in the system. There may be other aspects of this flow of experience that we find unpleasant. The mind begins to think, is daydreams, and comes back, and we might feel resistant to that or wish it were different. Push against that or try to make it stop thinking. It's noticing what happens in the system when we try to make something different than it is. Does that calm the system or does it agitate it? Is there a way to welcome the thinking mind with relaxation? Is there a way to soften around any pain in the body gently? And how does this affect the system? Just continuing to notice how you flow or resist the current of this flow river of experience. And is there a way to come into alignment with this river in a way that can bring calm or ease? And so, friends, we've been talking about wisdom and the Eightfold Path, and I'm going to summarize our exploration of wisdom tonight, tie it into the Eightfold Path, and complete this exploration that we've been making over many months. And so, just to touch into wisdom again is not something that, in the Buddhist understanding, not a big storehouse of knowledge the way we sometimes think of in English, but more of a process, more of a verb, more of a process of discerning, and something that is really cultivatable and immediate and accessible to each of us. Ajahn Sucitto talks about it as discernment. He says, wisdom is a relational experience rather than a storehouse of knowledge. One is wise about cause and effect, and hence one is alert to what is happening and how one is affected. In other words, wisdom is something you do, so opening to clarity can occur. And in the meditation, I invited us to look in a few places to see what's the impact on this practice of the body, the mind, and the heart. So we can begin to see that, how it is that we're affected, and begin to see that conditionality. Because wisdom is also learned in three ways. Learned, the first way we understand wisdom is we can learn it is through hearing about the teachings or reading about them. Secondly, by reflecting on them and turning them over in our minds, talking about them with friends, and then thirdly, trying them out and embodying them. It's how we cultivate this embodied wisdom. And really this invitation to try it on for ourselves. And I have a sutta about that. They called the Kalama Sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. And this is the Buddha in the town of the Kalamas, and the Kalama people are asking him, there's a lot of spiritual teachers that come through here, they say. A lot of and they're all claiming, this is the way, my way's the way, this is the best way. And they said to the Buddha, how do we know who's right? How do we know which spiritual practice is the one? And so the Buddha said this to them. And so the Buddha said, so I said to the Kalamas, don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, by analogies, by agreement through pondering views, by probability, or by the thought, this contemplative is our teacher. But when you know for yourselves that these qualities are unskillful, these qualities are not helpful, these qualities are not supported by the wise. So he's bringing in that too. We can consult the teachers, the wise. These qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to harm and to suffering, then you should abandon them. On the other hand, the Buddha said, when you know for yourselves that these qualities are skillful, these qualities are blameless, these qualities are praised by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to welfare and to happiness, then you know that those are the teachings for you. I really like that. And so I want to, with this in mind, that we're checking this out, we're experimenting, we're seeing for ourselves. I want to zoom out to have a more of a bird's eye view of the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is in the bigger scheme of things, in the larger map, the Eightfold Path is in another map called the Four Noble Truths. And the Eightfold Path is the fourth of those Noble Truths. So I want to go back to the Noble Truths and walk through those briefly, and then expand into the Eightfold Path. And so these Four Noble Truths are understood by many to be the core teaching of the Buddha. And the Buddha's teaching about suffering and the end of suffering. And so one of the first Noble Truth is that there is dukkha. And dukkha is sometimes translated as suffering. But I like, and all the different translations of that word dukkha are helpful. They give us different perspectives. But the translation that I like best, maybe, and Gil Fronsdal also likes this translation best, is the translation of dukkha as painful. Apparently in Pali, it actually literally means painful. So we could say that dukkha is something that's painful, or an aspect of our experience that's painful. And painful is an adjective of the experience, whereas suffering is a noun. And so suffering is like, this is suffering, this is the thing, the suffering. Whereas painful means that this, there's this part of this experience is painful. And my mind can grok that. This is suffering. My mind, well, what does that mean exactly? But when I say painful, we know what that means. And so the Buddhists in the First Noble Truth is saying there are painful experiences in this life. He's not saying that life is painful, but there are aspects of this life that are painful. And when many of us, when we hear that, there's a kind of a relief that, someone's naming it and pointing to it. The Buddha points to this quite a bit in different aspects of life. He says there are aspects of birth that are painful. Of course, there are aspects of birth that are not painful too. But as an adjective, we can say birth is sometimes painful. Death is sometimes painful, the Buddha says. Illness is sometimes painful. And there's a whole list of other things, and really many things. Getting what we don't want, receiving what we don't want is painful. Not getting what we want is painful. So being separated from people we love is painful, has a painful aspect to it. Having to associate with people we don't like has a painful aspect to it, the Buddha says. I like that he names these things. And it also kind of touches my heart. And I think, oh yeah, he knows me. He it's kind of reassuring. This is the First Noble Truth. Can range from very mild, painful experiences to very, very, very difficult, painful experiences. And of course, these are individual and collective. One of the images in the teachings is that these painful experiences and all the thoughts that go with them, the emotions that go with them, can be experienced like a big flood, like a tsunami, like a flood that comes through our lives and just carries us away. And the image of the Dharma one of the images of the Dharma is of the Dharma, the teachings, as a raft that can carry us over the flood. And I have just a quote from the Buddha, attributed to the Buddha. It says, "A raft well made has been lashed together. Having crossed over, gone to the far shore, I've subdued the flood." This shore is the shore of uncertainty and the painfulness of life and the unsatisfactoriness of life. The other shore is the shore of the ground we can stand on in the teaching. And so he's put together this raft that we can cross the flood. And this raft is the Dharma, and particularly the Eightfold Path. So that's the First Noble Truth. And our job is really to recognize that there is this pain in life. If we don't recognize it, it kind of can run us unawares. So then the second Noble Truth is to notice how we're crossing the flood of this painfulness of life. How is it that we're crossing? Are we, and think of yourself, think of, I think of swimming in the river here. If we're trying to swim against the current, we're trying to swim against the current, are we trying to do that? But cross the flood? Are we struggling really hard? I know what happens when I struggle really hard. I get really tired out if I'm in a river with got a little bit of current to it. If I stop and don't do anything, if I give up, that's not so good either. But if I can kind of navigate with the current, then I can find, that can be an easier way to find a way across. So here's another sutta from the Buddha about this. This is called crossing over the flood. And this is Ananda talking. Ananda says, I heard that on one occasion, the Blessed One was staying near Savatthi and Jeta's grove, Anathapindika's monastery. And he goes on to say that the Buddha was talking with a deva, a nature spirit. And this nature spirit says to the Buddha, tell me, dear sir, how you crossed over the flood. This flood in the mind and the heart of overwhelming emotion, perhaps overwhelming thought, difficult, challenging thoughts in the mind. And the Buddha says, it's a little bit of a paradox for the deva. He says, I crossed over the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place. But how, dear sir, did you cross over the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place? And the Buddha says, when I pushed forward, I was whirled about. When I stayed in place, I sank. And so I crossed over the flood without pushing forward, without staying in place. And so this pushing forward. And then the deva says, at long last, I see a teacher, totally unbound, who, without pushing forward, without staying in place, has crossed over the entanglements of the world. And so this is really speaking to this, how we cross the flood, how we meet what's happening. And are we pushing forward? That's how I usually meet it. I usually push forward, try to control it, try to push against the current, try to make the thoughts stop in my mind, try to make the mind calm down when it's not so calm. Try to make myself have certain experiences. Or as if I stop and don't put an effort in, I can sink into depression, into an anxiety, into paralysis. And so there's this way of moving without striving, without giving up, this middle path. This is the second noble truth. Noticing how we're crossing the flood. Are we crossing with pushing, striving, giving up, or this middle path? And this is often called non-clinging, non-striving. And so our task in this second noble truth is to notice how we're crossing, notice how we're meeting the experience, and adjust if necessary. Are we striving too much? Can we adjust and let go? The third truth is then if we do adjust, I don't know if in the meditation tonight you had any sense of adjusting, if there was any sense of resistance towards the thoughts, if there was any sense of being able to ease back, and any sense of release, any sense of ease. The third noble truth is if there is something like that, to notice it. Notice that little freedom in the mind. Notice that small moment of release, of relief, of ease. And then the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is a path of cultivating, really a path of happiness, a path of groundedness, a path of steadiness, so that we can meet the floods of life, so that we can meet the difficult experiences of life with a nourished heart in a wise and steady way. And so the Eightfold Path, which we've been looking at wisdom, wise view, and it's just a word about the words, wise view, wise intention. Those are the first two factors of the Eightfold Path. And then wise speech, wise action, wise livelihood, wise effort, mindfulness, and concentration. And we use the word wise, or sometimes right view. It's because this is the wise tool to use if you want to cultivate freedom and peace in the mind and the heart. It's the kind of the right tool, not right or wrong, but this is the tool to use. This will cultivate this aim, this intention. And so wise view, the one we've been looking at, and the first of the two wisdom factors is this understanding of cause and effect, of conditionality, understanding that our actions, our intentions, our the way we pay attention can lead to ease and peace, or lead to struggle, lead to non-harming, or lead to harm. And so this is wise view, this understanding of cause and effect and conditionality. And this leads right into the second factor of wise intention, because with wise intention, we begin to understand that intention itself is a part of conditionality. Intention itself starts to lead towards, starts conditionality in motion. And the wise intentions of renunciation, of goodwill, and of harmlessness begin to condition freedom in the mind and the heart. And we begin to notice, as we bring those intentions in, how renunciation can condition satisfaction or contentment. Goodwill, metta, kindness can condition deeper kindness and deeper sense of interconnection. How the intention for harmlessness or compassion, sometimes understood as compassion, can condition a way of holding the world, which brings peace. And we also begin to notice then their opposites, the intentions of grasping or greed, of ill will, and of harmfulness or cruelty, and what those begin to condition in our mind and heart. So we begin to notice those two streams of conditioning and begin to be able to move more fully with wise intention. And Thich Nhat Hanh says this, he says, each thought, each action in the sunlight of awareness becomes sacred. In this light, no boundary exists between the sacred and the ordinary. And so we can make our lives sacred in this way. And these intentions and guide how we live our lives in the world. And this leads into the next basket of the Eightfold Path, the basket or the collection of ethical behavior. And this is made up of 3 guidelines: wise speech, wise action, wise livelihood. And these intentions flower into these actions. And the wise speech is abstaining from false speech, slanderous speech, and idle chatter. That is chatter that doesn't further the goal of liberation. Of course, casual chatter and just checking, easy chatter, which doesn't have a serious connotation, is very important in connection. It's a very important way we communicate. So idle chatter doesn't mean not having light conversation. It is chatter that leads us away from being connected with each other, connected with our heart's intention. Wise action speaks about physical bodily expression in the world, how we channel our physical energy, and is guided by the precepts of harmlessness, respecting, not taking what's not freely offered, respecting our sexual energy, and respecting life, not taking life in the best way we can. Harmlessness as best we can within ourselves and with other people. And then wise livelihood, how we earn a living. The fundamental guidelines in this are that whatever we do to earn a living be legal, peaceful, honest, and not entail suffering or harm for ourselves or others. And so that basket of ethical behavior then settles the mind. As we begin to notice our virtuous behavior, this alone can settle the mind, settle the system. And I find it helpful to know that even if I've done something in my past, which we all have, that we regret, building a little bit of connection with our virtuous behavior, our ethical behavior in this moment, we settle our attention here, can build a bigger container for our sense of inner goodness. And the actions from the past are still going to be there, but they can be held in a larger container of our own goodness. This is a difficult one, I think, for us, but it's an important one. And Lama Surya Das says this. He says, the Eightfold Path shows us how to make our daily lives sacred by practicing ethical restraint, morality, and sincere virtue in all that we do. This is how we integrate meditation and awareness into our daily life. And as we do this, as we let ourselves settle into a little bit of sensing our own inner goodness, can settle the mind, calm the mind, and as it settles the mind, there can be a little bit of happiness, a little bit of joy in our inner goodness, a little bit of joy there. And this joy can uplift the system. For example, each person here has done something today that was motivated out of the intentions for harmlessness and care. I can guarantee that. Just knowing everyone who's here, I know that. When we begin to notice those things, we can begin to develop a little bit of happiness in the heart. What did you do for yourself today that was kind? Did you help yourself get dressed? Did you wash this morning? Did you let yourself have a shower? Did you make yourself lunch? Did you think, oh, sweetheart, I need a little nap right now? This, when we pay attention to these things, this can develop a little bit of quiet, of joy, of our goodness. And then regarding others, did you smile at someone even on Zoom tonight? Coming to the class, coming to the group tonight is a kindness to others. Please take that in your heart and have some joy from that, your goodness. So the Buddha said the more we can tune into this little happiness from our virtue, this tunes into the liberation process. This happiness, this quiet joy calms the system, and calm leads to another kind of happiness. Happiness leads to a deeper calm or concentration. Concentration can let us see clearly the patterns of the mind, and that can liberate the mind and the heart. So the Buddha said this area of goodness is really important. It is a direct path to liberation. So sometimes we think, I'm not that, I did that thing, but it's not a big deal. Or I did something really bad and I can't get over that. But we can, in this moment, take a little step in that direction. And so that's the Eightfold Path of wise speech, action, livelihood, ethical behavior. And then the next ones, calm, are the meditation practice, the bhavana practice. This is bhavana, a Pali word for cultivation of the mind and the heart. And it's important to know that there's three factors here: wise effort, wise mindfulness, and wise concentration. And we're cultivating the heart and the mind with these things. And if we were not cultivating the mind and the heart with these things, we would be cultivating something else. Before I knew the path, before I knew wise effort, wise mindfulness, and wise concentration, I was cultivating something. It did not lead me to peace. An untrained mind and heart doesn't know. My mind didn't know how to work with agitation, how to notice grasping, how grasping conditions unhappiness. I didn't know how to let go. And so, or let be. So we don't know. So we're always cultivating something. And so this path is supporting us to understand how to cultivate peace. So wise effort, wise mindfulness, and wise. So wise effort is two things, really: a wise application of energy so that we're not too tight and we're not too loose. We're not striving against the current and we're not sinking. We're not the musical instrument that's tied, that's tuned too tight, or the musical instrument that's tuned too loose. So we found that middle path of effort. And then the second understanding of effort is the effort of abandoning that which is not wise and cultivating that which is wise. And then wise mindfulness is done in the deep service of the deepest possible freedom. Wise mindfulness is knowing all of the Eightfold Path factors, knowing wisdom, how to cultivate our peace. Mindfulness itself, the capacity to pay attention, be in the present moment, is not necessarily wise mindfulness. A thief can have mindfulness, very present in the present moment, but not with the intention for wisdom. And so wise mindfulness is mindfulness in the service of the deepest liberation, in the service of the heart and the mind, freedom of the heart and the mind. And then wise concentration is the same, grounded in the service of clear seeing, so grounded in the service of wisdom. And there's a nice simile about how these three work together that I like in the teachings. There's an image of three people who want to pick some fruit from a high tree. And they can't, the two can't reach it on just by themselves. So one person, which is wise effort, one person makes a table out of their back. They're down on their hands and knees, and they make a little table, their back. Next person stands beside the person kneeling on all fours on the ground. And so then the third person gently steps up on the back of the person that's made the table, holds the shoulder of the person standing beside the table person, and then that person can reach high enough to get the fruit. And so wise effort is understood as the table, the person that's kneeling, and wise mindfulness is giving the shoulder to lean on, and wise concentration is able to aim in the direction that the trio wants to aim in. The attention is focused or gathered in a certain spot and can reach for freedom and liberation. And so these three things together support us to see how our inner world functions, supports us to see how we can see clearly into the patterns of our mind and heart, see clearly what leads to wisdom, see clearly what leads away. And simply as we begin to see this more clearly, the mind can unwind it by itself, or we can develop wise response. And so here's some examples I have been really noticing lately. I shouldn't say lately, for a long time, noticing striving, how my mind just automatically goes to striving. And then without seeing that, I just feed it. Unmindfulness. Mindlessness is the nourishment for striving. And I really notice it every day. Complete transparency. I notice it every day. Some kind of striving, particularly on Wednesdays when I'm trying to write a talk, I could get really striving. This is a big practice for me. I'm letting you in on my Wednesday, my Wednesday time. I can pretty much predict. Wednesday comes, striving. And so I get to work with it. I really do. I really get to work with it. It's really good. And so how do we cultivate it? One of the biggest conditions for striving is unawareness. One of the biggest ways we interrupt striving is through mindfulness of striving. Notice how is it in the body? So this is one of the patterns we can begin to see, and as we let ourselves tune into it, it can unwind by itself. We also need to put effort in. So there's the both and are involved there. But very often when I tune into, check this in yourself sometime, tune into the body. If there's some striving there, I often do this in meditation, and there's often striving, but as soon as I notice it, it eases. Has anybody ever noticed that when you're on the cushion? Check in for striving in the body, urgency in the body. Check it out next time. Just check in. Is there any striving? And usually there is. It's so unconscious. But then it can often just ease just with the noticing. When it doesn't ease immediately, then we bring in our wise effort. How do we abandon? How do we cultivate? So that's one pattern, the mindfulness of striving pattern. Here's another pattern. Check this out. How often, how many of us, when we relate to joy, and I want to say quiet joy, like the small joys, the joys of being present, the joys of Sangha, the joys of sunlight on your face, the small joys, how many people besides me often just tend to, oh yeah, no big deal. Just let it slide off. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And big joys, I'm thinking, tell you that when I was back in my filmmaking days, I remember this one time I was making grants, I had to write a lot of grants. And one of my early grants, I got back and they didn't give me what I asked for. They gave me double. You know how much time I spent with that? About 1 second. On to the next grant. I think back on that moment, oh my gosh. I think I should retroactively celebrate that moment. Like, how many moments like that do you let go by? Teflon. So that's a pattern we can notice in the mind. I'm catching up to that 20 years later. So this is a pattern we can begin to notice. And then when we notice, oh, there was a little joy, a little quiet joy, we can start to look for the quiet joy. Not only notice it when it zips on by, but actively look for it. And as we look for it, mindfulness of joy is the nourishment for more joy. And so right now, check into your own system. Is there any flavor of quiet joy present? Is there any flavor of quiet joy in the steadiness of your body on the chair? In the sense of, oh wow, I'm hearing the teachings. In the sense of, I'm so grateful for the Sangha. Any sense of quiet joy anywhere? You can ask yourself that question every hour. Please, let's take this into the week. Is there any quiet joy here? And then see what happens if you notice it. Is there any quiet joy in just resting back, just letting tiredness be here? Not struggling against it. We can get really creative when we look for this quiet joy. And so we can check out this pattern in the mind and the heart of how we relate to joy. And so these are just two patterns that we can begin to see and begin to relate to with our wise effort, wise mindfulness, wise concentration. And these three, then, concentration, which leads to clear seeing and clearly seeing the patterns, these lead us back to the beginning of the path, wise view, wise intention. Wise view, the cultivation, understanding of conditionality. wise intention, the power of intention in our conditionality, the intention to cultivate renunciation, non-harming, compassion. Noticing those intentions and how they cultivate, what they start to cultivate in this stream of conditionality. And so I want to summarize this, the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths in terms of this analogy of the raft to cross the flood. This raft of the Eightfold Path, which cultivates happiness, groundedness, wisdom. Wisdom of how to cross the flood. And so this raft, our jobs are, the R is to recognize what's happening. The A is to adjust if necessary. Adjust the rudder of the raft. Adjust the sail of the raft if you happen to have one, a sail on your particular raft. So we can adjust. And then often what this means is abandon striving. And then another way of understanding the A of raft is it's in the absence of striving that happiness can rise. Relief, ease, release can rise. The absence of trying to make something happen. And then the F is as we adjust the sails, if there's any sense of this release, any sense of this relief, any sense of this ease rising, any sense of this joy or happiness rise, feel it. Feel it. Know it. And so those are the first three of the Noble Truths. Recognize what's happening, and in terms of the Noble Truth of suffering, of dukkha, it's recognize if there's pain and struggle, which is important because that's how we can tune into, oh, something, the raft is, there's a bit of striving going on, maybe heading in the wrong direction. So recognize any struggle or painfulness. And traditionally, the task of the first Noble Truth is to understand dukkha. I've shifted that slightly to recognize dukkha so that we can fit in with the raft analogy. The task of the second Noble Truth is understood as abandoning, clinging. And I've adjusted it. You could say abandon, or you could say adjust the rudder of the raft. Adjust, are you clinging or striving? The third Noble Truth is to realize any freedom, and I've adjusted that to say feel into any freedom. And then the T of raft is the fourth Noble Truth, the Eightfold Path, and the T is try it out. Try it out for yourself. Try out the Eightfold Path. Traditionally, this task of the fourth Noble Truth is to develop the Eightfold Path. So in this raft analogy, we could say, recognize what's happening, especially if it's painful. Something needs to be adjusted. If you adjust and feel into the adjustment, and then you can feel into whether it's wise or not. So feel it, and then continue to try it out. Try out the Eightfold Path and see how it supports these first three. So I'm going to close with a quote from Gil Fronsdal. He says, the potential for practicing the Eightfold Path lies within us. When we practice the factors well, they transform us. They have the ability to reduce and even end our clinging, attachment, fear, hatred, and delusion. When this is done thoroughly, the Eightfold Path is not something we make an effort to do. When we are free, there is nowhere we need to go to find freedom. The Eightfold Path becomes who we are. Let's just sit for a minute. Thank you so much, dear friends, for the beautiful gift of your presence here tonight. That's helped us all to cultivate this understanding and to support the teachings settling into our hearts so that they really become who we are. May the merit, the benefit of our practice here tonight support our own hearts and ripple out to be a cause and a condition for the liberation and freedom of all beings everywhere.